Welcome to John Gets Games. Today I'll be doing an unpaid Kickstarter preview for Apotheca. In this game, players will be manipulating multicolored potions on a 4x4 grid through the use of powerful apothecaries. They will also be placing face-down potions onto that grid, all with the expressed final intent of creating 3 potions of the same color in a row. First I'll go over the rules, and then I'll jump into my initial impressions. Here's the starting setup for a game of Apotheca. You have 3 face-down potion cards in a diagonal across the board, and then 3 face-up potion cards in the corners. What these potions specifically are is random, but the starting setup is not. This is the setup for 2 players. We have 1 player over here and 1 over here. If it was a 3 or 4 player game, the central board would still be set up in the exact same way. Each player starts the game with a single random apothecary card. We see a gorgeous piece of artwork up here at the top, and then the pertinent details for that specific apothecary down on the bottom. Lastly, I'd like to point out that the arrows on these face-down potion cards are facing away from either of the starting players. This is important because it means that neither of these players have control over these face-down potions. I'll explain what that means in just a little bit. Each turn, a player will take 2 actions from a set of available 4 action options. You're never allowed to take the same exact action twice in one turn. We can see on these little handy player sheets that the first action type is Reveal. This is the simplest action. All you do is choose one of the face-down potion cards and flip it up so that everybody can see what that potion is. And then the active player will take 1 gem from the supply that is the same color as the potion that was just revealed. The next action option, as you can see on this sheet, is Restock. Now the way restocking works is you look at the board and you count the number of face-down potions. You then subtract that from 3 and you take that many face-down new potions to put on the board. In this case, we have 2 face-down potions, so we would only be able to put 1 more face-down potion. However, if it was a situation like this, then a player choosing the restock fee would get to place 3 new face-down potions. They draw these potions from the face-down potion stack, so in this instance they would draw 3, so we take 1, 2, 3. And now the player must place all 3 of these potions face-down somewhere on the board. As you do this, it is important to place these face-down potions so that the arrow points towards the player who played these potions. This is important because this is not a memory game, so in the future, a player is always able to peek at any potion cards on the board that have an arrow pointing towards them because they are the person who placed those potions. The third action option for a turn is Power. What this means is you get to activate one of your active apothecaries. Now, you're able to do a power multiple times on a turn as long as you activate different apothecaries each time. Obviously, in the beginning of the game, each player only has 1 apothecary. When you activate the apothecary, you look at the text that's down at the bottom. We see this is Owl Swoop. It says move a card 1 or more spaces in a diagonal line. It may move through other cards. We also have a nice little infographic that shows you exactly the kind of pattern that this apothecary move will give you. So this power would allow us to do lots of different things. We could take this potion and move it diagonally up here, or we could take this potion and move it diagonally all the way over here if we so chose. The goal that you're striving for on each turn of the game is to make a matching set of 3 potions of a color in any line going across the board. They must be orthogonal, diagonal does not count. And now let's do a quick example of how to make a matching set of 3 and then what happens when we do so. So let's pretend that it's the right-hand player's turn, it's the beginning of their turn, so their first action might be to reveal this card, which they knew was yellow, so they would take 1 yellow from the bank into their player area, and then their second action could be to activate this Owl Swoop, which allows them to move a potion diagonal. So we can move it up here, and now we've created a 3 in a row matching color set of yellow potions. Once the set is created, we take it off the board and we need to put it onto an active apothecary. In this instance, the right-hand player only has a single active apothecary, so we put it on top of that apothecary there, and we've now created a match. The game ends when any player gets their 3rd match. However, once you put a matching set on top of an active apothecary, you get to slide it over to the side and you don't get to use it anymore. It just stays as essentially victory points tracking how many of these matches you've done, but now you need to get more apothecaries. So the last of the action options involves hiring a new apothecary so that we can have cool stuff to continue doing on our turns. Now the way that works is you need to pay 2 gems of the matching color in order to grab the apothecary that is in this kind of market here. Now this is always going to be out on the table, it just couldn't quite fit it on the screen. It's arbitrary which cards came out under which of these gem types. There's no specific value between them. However, once you purchase a specific apothecary, a new one is going to come and refill that spot in the area. So for instance, if this player had 2 blue, they could spend these 2 blue gems back to the bank, and then they would take the apothecary that is underneath the blue gem. That is now an active apothecary for them, and a new one is going to come out for the blue area. There is one additional way to hire apothecaries from the row, however. If you have one of each of the gem colors, you can spend all three of them and take an apothecary randomly from the top of the deck, and now that is another active apothecary for your area. As I mentioned earlier, you can activate the power action multiple times on a turn as long as you're using different apothecaries, so it's a good idea to get multiple apothecaries and have your entire turn be activating one and then activating another, because they can have very large impacts on the board. Now I'd like to briefly show you special matching. So in general, you're going for those 3 in a row on the board, but what if you create more than one 3 in a row at the same exact time? So for instance, we have this angle down here. If a player was to reveal this, we've now made 2 simultaneous 3 in a rows, and this is a special match pattern. There are 4 of these patterns in the game. When this happens, the player takes the entire match off of the board, but as a bonus, they also get a single gem of that specific color from the bank, which they get to put into their player area. The 3 other special match patterns involve the plus sign match right here, the 4 in a row match here, and finally the T match, as you can see right here. It's also important to note that if the market ever becomes completely full, then a player needs to reveal the top random card from the potion deck, and then every potion from that color is going to get removed from the board in order to free up some space for playing. And as I mentioned before, the first player to get to 3 matches first immediately wins the game. Now I'm going to briefly discuss the differences between the 3 and 4 player game versus the 2 player game. The only difference for a 3 player game is that the third player is going to get an extra action token. So in this case, the right player would go first, then the left player would go, and now we have the third player. They get to discard this card once in the game, and they get a third action on a given turn. So this helps them catch up for the fact that they're at a slightly disadvantageous position as the board starts early. The 4 player game of Apotheca is actually 2 teams of 2 players going against each other. You make sure that you sit every other person, so this would be Team 1, Team 2, Team 1, and Team 2, and you play the game as normal. The first team to 3 matches is going to win immediately, and that's pretty much it. You're not allowed to share with the gems of your teammates, or look at their potions, or use their apothecaries. So now I'm going to talk briefly about my initial impressions about Apotheca. This is not a review. I'm not going to do any kind of pro or con in-depth analysis, just some of the thoughts and feelings that I've had as I've played this game a couple times. And the initial impression that hit me after the first time I played the game was, wow, this is a much lighter, quicker experience than I was expecting. I would think I was expecting more of a 45-ish minute game, but realistically this is more of a 15 to 20 minute game. And that's not a bad thing, you just need to have that expectation going in. This is a match 3 game, and every single turn it feels quite tactical. There's definitely a tiny bit of strategy, as in trying to set up your next turn, but there's very little like 3 or 4 turn down the road type of thinking going into play. You're really thinking, can I make a match this turn? If you decide that you cannot, then, well, can I set it up so that A, my opponent cannot make a match on their turn, and set myself up to make a match on my following turn. So really you have like your opponent's turn and your next turn as your general window of thought. And there's quite a bit to think about. You know, when you look at, when you look at all these apothecary cards, first of all, you almost get distracted at how stunningly gorgeous the art is on these cards. I mean, really just gobsmackingly stunning artwork. But anyway, when you look at the bottom parts, where the actual meat and potatoes of the game, the mechanics as you're shifting things around, there's all sorts of really cool powers that you have available here. And if you play the game such that you have at least 2 apothecaries in front of you active, you can do quite a bit of stuff for your 2 actions. And if your opponent has 2 of those apothecaries, then you have quite a bit to think about on your turn, which is a good thing, because it's only a 4x4 grid, so there's only so much that's really going on and so many different possibilities. But if your opponent has the ability to slide any potion to the left, but they can also essentially pick up the board and tilt it to the right or left and have all the potions stacked down to one side, there's a bunch of permutations that they can really maneuver to do in order to get a match of 3. So there's quite a bit of thinking involved in putting down a potion that will not give your opponent a match. It's very cool. I really like the restocking ability in the game, where you take 1 to 3 of these potions and you put them face down on the board. I think that's one of the coolest ideas of the game, really, especially with the arrow iconography on the back, so that there's no memorization. You can always know which ones you put down and you can take a peek at them. So when you put these things down, your opponent is going to be thinking, are they trying to throw me off? Or maybe they're just trying to set themselves up for their next turn. And so they essentially have to take a gamble, because they only have those 2 actions. And if one of those actions is flipping over a tile thinking that you put it specifically there so that you'd be able to make an awesome set next turn, well, they might be screwing over your next turn. Or maybe you bluffed with that, and now they've essentially wasted half of their turn in doing that. but ultimately by flipping over these tiles, you get gems, and gems get you apothecaries, and having a big handful of apothecaries really broadens the scope of things you can do, which is not a bad thing at all. So in closing, this is a gorgeous tactical filler game that really activates that spatial puzzle part of your brain as you're trying to figure out what can I maximize out of my turn this turn, as well as maybe setting something up for the next turn. But you have to keep in mind that your opponent is doing the same exact things back at you, and the board could look completely different by the time it comes back to you. So it's just all about digging into that puzzle that's set in front of you at the beginning of each of your turns. It's got amazing, gorgeous artwork, and just seems like a really good package. If any of this looks interesting to you, I strongly suggest you check out their Kickstarter page. And if you'd like to see more previews of games like this, as well as in-depth reviews, full game playthroughs, and vlogs, please consider subscribing to my channel. Thanks for watching.